What Lou wanted me to address preliminarily is really just four pretty good, straightforward questions. Why did I participate in the documentary? And we'll include Jerry Buting, my co-counsel in the Avery case, in that. What were we hoping would be the outcome of participating in a film that's being made, or the footage for which is being shot as pretrial proceedings and the trial itself are ongoing? What if the prosecution had participated in the documentary in a fuller way? Would the public reaction possibly have been different? And of all the media interviews in which Jerry Buting and I have participated, that's a question no one has asked, and I think it's a good question. And then fourth and finally, he's asked me just in a few minutes to say a little bit about whether I would do it all again, or if so, would I do it differently, both the trial and the documentary. I think I'll leave the trial piece of that for time on the panel with Anahita and Gary. But I'm happy to address the four questions otherwise. I didn't anticipate when I got into the case that I'd be participating in an effort to make a film. I wouldn't have gotten into a case with that expectation or purpose. And so how did it happen? Well, the key piece to that is timing initially. Stephen Avery, our client, my client and Jerry's, our client collectively, was arrested in early November 2005 and then charged pretty shortly after that with first-degree intentional homicide in Teresa Halbach's death. He initially was represented by, at the first appearance, he had a different lawyer altogether, but after the first appearance, Stephen was represented by two very capable assistant state public defenders from Wisconsin. The State Public Defender's Office actually drew from outside of Manitowoc County to try to put together a really capable team, and they did, to represent Stephen Avery, good lawyers. And those two lawyers had the case for the first 2.5 months of its pendency. He then settled the Section 1983 civil action that he had going against Manitowoc County because he wanted to hire private counsel, and that's what his family wanted to do as well. And so I enter my appearance just about 2.5 months after Stephen was charged. Jerry comes in about 2 weeks after that. And the reason the timing is important is that very shortly after Stephen was charged in November, a lawyer who was not particularly happy, I think, being a lawyer at that point and was pursuing a PhD in film at Columbia University in New York, was riding the subway, as good New Yorkers do, into her job at a large law firm in the morning, and as you do on the subway, you read a newspaper, right? So she's not a New York Daily News kind of person, she's more of a New York Times kind of person. So she's reading the New York Times, and as she tells the story, here she finds a few column inches devoted to the story of an exoneree in Wisconsin, released 2 years earlier after serving 18 years for a rape that he did not commit, and then rearrested and charged with murder barely more than 2 years after his release on the wrongful rape conviction. And there she is, reading those few inches on the subway, and she says, I'm going to Manitowoc, Wisconsin, and that's going to be my first movie, my first film. She and her partner, Moira Demos, did exactly that. So they were there in Manitowoc 2 months before I first got involved in Stephen Avery's case. And they had met with Stephen. They had met with his family. They had, to a very large degree, developed a rapport and trust, which was remarkable because the culture clash there was not insignificant. I will wager that these two were the very first PhD film students Stephen Avery ever had met, and that his family had met. But they really had built a rapport and developed trust with Stephen and his family by the time Jerry and I arrived. And so we were asked very early on to consider cooperating with and participating with the filmmakers. And to some extent, of course, the die is now cast because our client has cooperated and the family is cooperating with the filmmakers, and there's going to be a product at some point, one would assume. So although very skeptical about getting involved, for all the reasons you would be, right? I mean, we're lawyers, there's privilege issues, there's work product issues, there's control issues always with lawyers, right? I mean, we want to be in control, certainly, of a pretrial and trial process. There's intrusion issues, distraction, all of that stuff. Very, very wary about getting involved in this, but had a client who wanted to see that happen. And so we took it in small steps, very incrementally. And what we came to learn, and this may be useful, at some point, people in this room may confront the same sort of issue. What we came to learn is, first of all, these were very bright filmmakers. They were smart. And they had their sights set on a more distant horizon than just, did he do it, did he not do it? Is he guilty, is he innocent? To be sure, they were interested in the two compelling, concrete storylines in the film, Brendan Dassey's experience in Wisconsin's criminal justice system and Stephen Avery's experience. Absolutely interested in that, but it was clear in talking with them from the outset that they hoped to use those stories to raise broader questions about the administration of criminal justice, not just in Wisconsin, but potentially anywhere. That was appealing to Jerry Buting and to me. Jerry, so this is 9, almost 10 years ago. Jerry had been practicing 25 years plus at that point, doing nothing but criminal defense, initially as a public defender and then later in private practice. I, by this time, had been practicing over 20 years, not all of it as a criminal defense lawyer, but most of that as a criminal defense lawyer. So, that was appealing to us. It was also important, as it turned out, that one of these two filmmakers was a lawyer, is a lawyer. That just mattered. Why? Because you didn't have to belabor the attorney-client privilege issues, right? She's like, Dean, I got it. I went to Northwestern, practiced at a big firm. I got it. Privilege issues, work product issues. And that, that really was, it was just very helpful in terms of getting us over one hump and being willing to participate. Beyond that, they kept their word with us. You know, when they said they would do something, they did. It was that simple. So there was, you know, a process of building trust with us as well. It was important also that nothing was going to be released until both Stephen Avery's case and Brendan Dassey's cases were long over. Win, lose, whatever, those cases were going to be over before there would be a trailer, a short, you know, anything. Now, I don't know that the two filmmakers anticipated that it would be almost 9 years before they got the film to market. But nothing was going to happen while the two cases were pending. Essential from our standpoint for obvious reasons. And then, perhaps of most practical importance when you encounter something like this, the actual way they handled filming was really pretty unintrusive. Often it was with natural light. It was never with more than one shoulder-held camera. You know, when additional light was required, quick setup, quick takedown, a lavalier mic, you know, occasionally, but for what was happening in court, we were already having to wear a mic at the judge's direction because there was intense media interest and coverage in the trial. So pretty unintrusive process of filming. And when we said, not tonight, they said, fine. You know, just tell us when you're available. So that's how we came to participate as fully as we did. I've already told you really what I was hoping for the outcome, and I know Jerry was hoping for the outcome, which is that some thoughtful film would emerge that would at least invite viewers to consider bigger questions of justice in America, the role of class in our criminal justice system, the experience of juveniles in our criminal justice system, the experience of people who may be developmentally delayed, the role of police, the potential for bias in any police investigation, which, you know, it's sort of presented in sharp relief here, at least the potential for bias, and any number of other questions you might want to ask. The role of lawyers in pretrial publicity, the balance between the First Amendment's freedom of the press and the Sixth Amendment guarantees of a fair trial and the bundle of rights that go with that. You know, so we were hopeful that the film would produce something that invited thoughtful discussion about those issues. Nobody had any idea what the public response would be. I mean, nobody had any idea. Starting with the filmmakers, they I'm comfortable asserting, they thought that, you know, this was headed for, you know, sort of the 100-minute, 105-minute film, theatrical release, documentary, probably show in 3 art houses with, you know, 17 people who would ever see the movie, right? But they were, you know, they were going to establish their bones. It was their first film. I think that's what they anticipated the product would be. That's, you know, certainly what I expected. There was really no way that I know. I can't speak for Netflix or really, I guess, anybody other than myself, but I had no way to anticipate the response. And, you know, we could talk all night about the different ways in which we're now consuming content because of, you know, the ability to stream content from the internet and the new offering that we don't have to wait, for next Wednesday night for the next episode. We can just take all these episodes now, right? And the default position, the nudge you're getting from a behavioral psychology standpoint is if you do nothing, if you're just, inert on your couch eating your Cheetos, the next episode queues up automatically. There it is. You can watch the counter, 17 seconds, 16 seconds, right? So we could talk all night about and I'm not going to, don't worry. But the ways in which we're consuming content change the appetite for the content, change the way we appreciate and take in the content. In that sense, sort of in a metaphysical sense, change the content itself. But all that aside, no way to anticipate. I mean, look, you probably ought to be here to see Anahita, okay? and I hope you are, and Gary. But what I am sure about, regardless of why you're here, of this I am absolutely rock solid certain. 9 weeks ago, not one person in this room had ever heard of Dean Strang. Not one. And indeed, everyone in this room would have aged very gracefully for the next 50 or 60 years and still never heard of Dean Strang. Okay? And here I am, not just figuratively in Hollywood, but in frickin' Hollywood. What if the prosecution had participated more fully in this film? And let me explain how they did and did not participate, as I understand it, and I think I have this right. The trial itself, and then at least some of the later pretrial proceedings, were orchestrated by judicial rule so that there would be one media feed and one media feed only. Any reporter who wanted access to the courtroom had to agree, and his or her TV station had to agree to accept the common feed so that there wouldn't be, a plethora of cameras and confusion. And that's what the judge directed, made sense. And all the media, local media outlets got on board with that. And then the problem became, because Green Bay, Wisconsin was the nearest major media market to this trial, and the Green Bay market isn't all that big. It's down in the 130s or something on the list of media markets in the United States. Next closest market, Milwaukee, which is, something up in the 30s maybe, in terms of media markets in the country, but not huge, right? So staffing became an issue immediately for the media, and the filmmakers were clever. Quickly, they said, "We'll volunteer to run the feed. We'll volunteer to run the cameras. We're going to be here anyway for the duration. We'll do it." All the TV stations jumped at this because they didn't then have to have, somebody, a production person there 8 hours a day, for weeks on end. And so much of the prosecution's participation in this film that you see, if you've watched it, is just through that shared media feed, to which all outlets, including these two filmmakers, had equal access, equal license to use, all right? Beyond then what was accumulated in footage from proceedings in court, the prosecutors elected not to sit down for interviews, not to, sort of invite the filmmakers into their space, if you will. That was the decision they made. So what might have been different? I don't know that I have any better answer for that than you could give. But I regret, I know I regret that the prosecutors did not at least allow some backstage access, for want of a better description. You know what I mean? Out of court access. I think it would have been edifying for the public to be able to see something about how lawyers on the prosecution side prepare, think about, challenges that they'll face in the trial, anticipate defense strategy, decide when and how to use their best stuff, all that kind of stuff. I think it would have been edifying. And I think it could have been done without exacerbating the inevitable, and let's be honest about this, inevitable incremental pain that a film caused the family of Teresa Halbach. This wasn't fiction, obviously, right? I mean, a real young woman, 25 years old, lost her life for no discernible reason at all. And a family then is left with a hole torn in it forever. And there's no question that any true crime film or series or presentation you see affects a victim's family disproportionately. But I don't know that the prosecution being involved in this would have added to that in any way. And I do know, just, from my own point of view, so that I'm not concealing it, a thoughtful true crime film or series is worth doing, and it's worth watching if it's not presented voyeuristically and is thoughtful, notwithstanding the peculiar and additional pain that must cause a victim's family. I think there is a greater public good in all of us considering, not through Law and Order, Special Victims Unit, or not exclusively through, fictional counts, the way in which our criminal justice system operates in real life. So, that's a regret with which I'm left, at least, that the prosecution made the decision not to participate more fully in the film. Finally, if I could do it over again, would I handle my own participation in the film differently? I don't know that I would, but I don't know that there would be a do it again. I have no reason to think that the occasion would arise again. And if it did, it's hard for me to imagine the really desirable constellation of factors that I've already described appearing again that would make it a reasonable choice to go forward with, letting people film you out of court and in relatively candid moments. I don't know that that would ever happen again. There's no reason to think that it would. But But if it did, I don't know there's anything big I would do differently. I sure as hell actually would keep my bare feet off the couch. Yeah. That I'd do differently. And as you know, my wardrobe could use a little upping. But, you know, you got what you asked for. I am just a lawyer from Wisconsin, so.